Montana Territory, 1869. The brutal winter had finally released its grip on the land. Snowmelt rushed down from the mountains, turning small creeks into raging torrents and breathing life back into the valley. But for Olivia Montgomery, spring brought no such renewal. She sat in her wheeled chair on the small porch of her dilapidated cabin, watching as the last of her father's cattle, now her cattle, were led away by the bank agent. 3 cows and a bull, the sum total of what remained of the once promising Circle M ranch. That settles your father's debts, Miss Montgomery, the bank agent said, tipping his hat. The property taxes are paid through August. After that, he shrugged, uncomfortable with having to state the obvious. Olivia nodded stiffly. At 22, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. The coach accident 2 years prior had crushed her legs, leaving her unable to walk. 6 months ago, her father had died from pneumonia after falling through river ice while trying to rescue a stranded calf. Now she was alone, crippled with nothing but a small cabin and a few acres of land that she couldn't possibly work herself. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," she said quietly, her hands gripping the wooden wheels of her chair. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her once fine blue dress had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. "I appreciate your fairness in the accounting." The man nodded uncomfortably before mounting his horse. He hesitated, then said, "Miss Montgomery, perhaps you should consider other arrangements. Write to relatives back east. This territory is hard enough on able-bodied men. A woman alone, especially in your condition." "I have no family left," Olivia interrupted, her voice firm despite the hollow ache in her stomach. She'd eaten the last of her cornmeal that morning. "And this land is all I have." "Good day, sir." As the bank agent and her last livestock disappeared down the trail, Olivia allowed herself a moment of despair. She had fought so hard after the accident, learning to dress herself, to cook from her chair, to manage basic tasks. But how could she possibly survive now? Her father's dream of a prosperous cattle ranch had died with him, and her own dreams of a normal life, marriage, children, a home filled with laughter, had been crushed along with her legs. "The frontier is no place for broken things," she whispered to herself, repeating the bitter truth that had become her mantra, "especially broken women." She wheeled herself back inside the cabin, taking inventory of what remained. A cup of flour, some dried beans, 3 potatoes, sprouting eyes, and a bit of salt. Perhaps a week's worth of food if she stretched it. After that, Olivia glanced at her father's rifle hanging above the fireplace. One final option when hunger became too much to bear. She closed her eyes against the thought, not yet, not while she had even one fight left in her. 20 miles away, Jackson Reed stared at the cattle dotting the hillsides of the Diamond R Ranch. At 26, he had built one of the largest and most successful ranching operations in the territory, with over 10,000 acres of prime grazing land and nearly 2,000 head of cattle. His 3-story ranch house stood as a testament to his success, with its fresh white paint, glass windows imported from St. Louis, and furnishings that would not have been out of place in a fine Boston home. Yet despite his wealth, Jackson felt the emptiness of the big house acutely, especially in the evenings when his ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse, leaving him alone with his ledgers and his thoughts. Mr. Reed, his foreman Frank Wilson, stood in the doorway of his office. That new herd from Peterson at the bank just arrived, only 4 head, but the bull's a fine specimen, Hereford stock. Jackson nodded. "Put them in the north pasture with the others." What was Peterson doing with such a small herd? "Debt collection," he said, "from the Montgomery place up near Elk Creek. Old man Montgomery died last winter, left everything to his daughter. Crippled girl, can't walk. Peterson thinks she'll lose the place by fall." Something tugged at Jackson's memory. Montgomery, Henry Montgomery. "That's the one, you knew him." Jackson stood, moving to the window. "He helped my father when we first came to the territory, shared his water rights during the drought of '56. Good man." He frowned, remembering the news of the daughter's accident. He'd sent a man with provisions after hearing of Henry's death, but hadn't given it much thought since. "And the daughter's up there alone?" Jackson asked, surprising himself with his concern. Frank nodded. "Peterson says she's too proud to ask for help, got nobody left, from what I understand." Jackson turned from the window, a strange restlessness taking hold of him. He had built his empire through hard work and shrewd dealings, but also through luck and the generosity of men like Henry Montgomery. The thought of the man's daughter starving alone in a cabin stirred something uncomfortable in him. "Saddle my horse," he said abruptly, "and have Mrs. Hatcher pack up some provisions." Frank raised his eyebrows but knew better than to question his boss. "Yes, sir, planning a long ride. Just to Elk Creek and back. Should return by nightfall." As his men prepared for his journey, Jackson found himself oddly anxious about the visit. He had little experience with women beyond the occasional social calls when he visited Helena or the working girls at the saloon. And a crippled woman, what would he say to her? How would he offer help without wounding her pride? The truth was, Jackson Reed had built his ranch and his fortune with a single-minded purpose that left little room for personal connections. His father had taught him that a man's worth was measured by what he built, what he owned, what he controlled. Love was a distraction that could cost a man everything in a land this unforgiving. "A rancher has no business with matters of the heart," his father had told him. "The land is your wife, the cattle your children. That's all a man needs to leave his mark on the world." Jackson had lived by those words, focusing on expansion, on acquisition, on building something that would outlast him. Yet lately he had begun to question whether empire building alone could satisfy the hollow feeling that grew within him each night as he sat in his grand, empty house. As Jackson rode toward Elk Creek, he told himself this was merely a debt of honor to a man who had once helped his family, nothing more, certainly not the beginning of anything that might challenge the solitary life he had built for himself. He could not have known how wrong he was. Olivia was checking her traps when she heard the approaching horse. She had managed to catch a rabbit the day before, and the small creature had provided her with a meager but welcome meal. Living on the frontier had taught her survival skills, even if her condition made applying them difficult. She tensed at the sound of hoofbeats, quickly wheeling herself back toward the cabin where her father's rifle waited. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome these days. Either they came with pity she couldn't stomach or demands she couldn't meet. The rider came into view, a tall man on a magnificent chestnut stallion. His clothes marked him as wealthy. Good boots, a well-made coat despite the warming weather, a hat that hadn't been patched and repatched. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who owned the land beneath his horse's hooves. Olivia reached the porch just as the stranger dismounted. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a few years older than herself. Handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face that stood out among the bearded men of the territory. His eyes, she noticed with an unwelcome flutter, were a striking blue that reminded her of summer skies. "Miss Montgomery," he called, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Who's asking?" Olivia replied, her hand resting near the rifle she'd managed to prop beside her chair. The man approached, removing his hat. "Jackson Reed, ma'am. I own the Diamond R down in the valley." He gestured to the bundles attached to his saddle. "I've brought some provisions, thought you might have need of them." Olivia's face flushed hot with humiliation. So word had spread already of her desperate circumstances. Now the wealthy ranchers were bringing charity to the poor crippled girl. "I don't accept handouts, Mr. Reed," she said coldly. "If you've come out of pity, you've wasted your time." Jackson looked taken aback by her hostility, his eyes flicking to her wheeled chair and then quickly away. "No, ma'am, not pity. Your father once helped mine during a hard time. I'm simply repaying a debt the Reed family owes the Montgomery family." Olivia studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, her shoulders slumped slightly. Pride was a luxury she could ill afford when starvation loomed. "What sort of provisions?" she asked finally. Relief flickered across Jackson's face. "Flour, coffee, sugar, salt pork, beans, some preserves Mrs. Hatcher put up last fall." "Nothing fancy, just staples to tide you over." Olivia nodded stiffly. "I accept then, in memory of our father's friendship." Jackson brought the supplies in, making several trips while Olivia directed him where to store things. She noticed he moved with efficiency, not rushing through the task as if eager to escape her presence. He also didn't stare at her legs or ask invasive questions about her condition, which raised him somewhat in her estimation. "Your cabin's roof is sagging on the north side," he commented as he set the last of the supplies on her small table. "First heavy rain's going to cause trouble." I'm aware, Olivia said dryly. Unfortunately, roofing repairs are rather difficult from this position. She gestured to her wheeled chair. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. I could send some of my men up to fix it. They're good workers. The offer tempted her desperately. The roof had worried her for months, but there was no way she could manage the repairs herself. Still, accepting help meant admitting her limitations, acknowledging that she couldn't maintain her home alone. Why would you do that? She asked bluntly. Jackson seemed caught off guard by the question. As I said, a debt. A sack of flour and some coffee might settle a debt, Olivia interrupted. Sending men to repair my roof goes beyond that. What do you want in return, Mr. Reed? A flash of something, annoyance, respect, crossed his face. Not everything comes with strings attached, Miss Montgomery. In my experience, Mr. Reed, everything does. She wheeled herself to the window, looking out at her overgrown fields, especially for someone in my position. Jackson was silent for a moment, and Olivia wondered if she'd offended him with her suspicion. But when she turned back, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your father was a good man, he said finally. He helped many in this valley when they needed it, my family included. I'd like to honor his memory by ensuring his daughter doesn't lose her home. The sincerity in his voice made something catch in Olivia's throat. I have until August, she said quietly. Jackson nodded. Then we have time to figure something out. Olivia raised an eyebrow. A slight smile touched Jackson's lips, softening his serious face. Figure of speech, ma'am, I meant no presumption. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll send men for that roof next week, if you'll allow it. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Jackson, he corrected, we're neighbors after all. As he mounted his horse to leave, Olivia felt a confusion of emotions she couldn't quite sort through. Relief at the provisions that would keep her from starving, gratitude for the offered help with the roof, resentment at needing charity, and something else, a fluttering awareness of Jackson Reed as a man, not just a benefactor. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as a woman rather than just a cripple that the feeling was almost unrecognizable. She quickly tamped it down. Men like Jackson Reed, wealthy, handsome, whole, didn't look twice at women like her. His help was merely kindness, perhaps mixed with pity despite his denials. The frontier is no place for broken things, she reminded herself as she watched him ride away. Especially broken hearts. True to his word, Jackson sent 3 men the following week to repair her roof. They worked efficiently, treating her with respect rather than pity, and left the place better than they'd found it. They'd also, she discovered after they departed, stacked a significant amount of firewood behind the cabin and repaired her chicken coop, though she had no chickens to house in it. 2 days later, Jackson himself returned, this time with a wooden crate that clucked and rustled in the back of his wagon. 6 laying hens, he announced as he carefully transferred the birds to her newly repaired coop. And a rooster to keep them company. Olivia watched from her chair, conflicted. Mr. Reed, Jackson, this is too much. He shrugged, brushing chicken feathers from his hands. They're extra from my flock. And eggs will give you something to trade in town. She knew it wasn't true. Nothing about his generosity was extra or coincidental, yet she couldn't bring herself to refuse. The chickens represented something precious, a small measure of self-sufficiency. Thank you, she said simply. Jackson nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. I noticed your garden plot's unplanted, he commented, changing the subject. Seems a shame with such good soil. Olivia sighed. I managed to prepare some of the ground, but it's slow work from this chair, and reaching to plant the seeds, she gestured at her legs. Some things are beyond me now. Jackson studied the empty garden plot, then looked back at her. Would you accept help with that as well? Olivia hesitated. His continued assistance made her both grateful and uneasy. Why are you doing all this? She asked. Jackson was silent for a long moment. Truthfully, he finally said, I'm not entirely sure. I intended one visit to bring provisions and honor a debt. But he looked around at the small homestead, then back at Olivia. I admire your determination, Miss Montgomery. Most would have given up. Olivia, she corrected softly. If we're to be neighbors using first names. He smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face. Olivia then, will you allow me to help with your garden? I can't plant it myself, ranch business keeps me too busy, but I could send someone who knows their way around vegetables better than I do. She found herself nodding. I would appreciate that, and perhaps you might join me for supper sometime, as thanks. The invitation surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. I'd like that, Jackson said, and the warmth in his eyes sent that unfamiliar flutter through her chest again. As May turned to June, Olivia's small homestead underwent a transformation. The garden Jackson's housekeeper had helped her plant began to sprout rows of vegetables. The chickens settled into their coop, providing eggs that Olivia could eat and trade. Jackson continued to visit, never empty-handed, bringing small tools modified for her use from the chair, books from his library, even a sturdy work table built at a height she could use comfortably. Their suppers together became a regular occurrence once a week when Jackson's ranch duties allowed. At first, conversation was awkward, both of them unused to social niceties, but gradually they began to share pieces of themselves. Jackson told her of building the Diamond R from the modest operation his father had left him, of his dreams to create something lasting in the territory. Olivia shared memories of her life before the accident, her education back east, her love of music and books, her initial reluctance to follow her father to the frontier. One evening in late June, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Jackson asked the question she'd been dreading. If you don't mind my asking, he said carefully, how did it happen? Your legs, I mean. Olivia was silent for so long that Jackson began to apologize for his presumption, but she shook her head. It's all right, she said softly. It was a stagecoach accident 2 years ago. Father and I were returning from Helena. She looked down at her useless legs. The coach took a turn too fast. The driver had been drinking. We went over the side of the road, down a ravine. Father was thrown clear, but I was trapped under the coach when it rolled. She took a deep breath. The doctor said the bones healed, but something about the nerves being severed. I can feel nothing from the waist down. Jackson's face showed compassion without the pity she'd grown to hate. I'm sorry, he said simply. So am I, Olivia replied, surprised by her own candor. Not just for the loss of my legs, but for what came after. Father worked himself to exhaustion trying to care for me and run the ranch. If not for that, he might have survived the winter. He might still be here. You blame yourself for his death, Jackson observed quietly. Olivia looked away. Wouldn't you? He fell through that ice trying to save a calf because he was too tired to notice the danger. Too tired because every task took twice as long with a crippled daughter to care for. Jackson was silent for a moment. Then he said, my father died of a heart attack when I was 20, right in the middle of branding season. I found him slumped over by the corral. He stared out at the darkening landscape. For years, I blamed myself, thought if I'd been a better son, taken more responsibility, not argued with him about expanding the herd, he might have lived longer. Olivia turned to him, surprised by this revelation. It took me a long time to understand that we don't control when death comes, Jackson continued, and burdening ourselves with blame doesn't honor those we've lost. The word struck Olivia with unexpected force. She had carried her guilt for so long that it had become a part of her, intertwined with her grief and her disability until she couldn't separate one from the others. How do you let it go? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson's eyes met hers, the fading light catching the blue in them. By living, by building something from what they left us, by finding joy where we can. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred souls. Two people who understood loss, who carried private burdens, who struggled with legacy and loneliness. As Jackson prepared to leave that evening, he hesitated beside his horse. There's a social gathering in town next week. Independence Day celebration. Would you consider attending with me? Olivia stared at him, astonished. She hadn't been to town, hadn't participated in any social event since her accident. The thought of being seen, being pitied, being the object of whispers and stares. I can't, she said automatically. My chair the terrain. I have a wagon with good springs, Jackson said, and I'd be there to assist you. He paused. You shouldn't have to hide away, Olivia. You deserve to enjoy music and company as much as anyone. The invitation awakened a longing she had suppressed for 2 years. a desire to be part of the world again, to experience something beyond the confines of her cabin and her disability. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Jackson smiled. "That's all I ask." After he left, Olivia sat on her porch long into the night, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky. For the first time since her accident, she allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she had resigned herself to, one that wasn't defined solely by survival and limitation. It was a dangerous thought. Hope, after all, was the most painful thing to lose. The Independence Day celebration loomed in Olivia's thoughts all week. She vacillated between determination to attend and terror at the prospect. What would people say? How would they look at her, and more personally, what would it mean to be seen publicly with Jackson Reed, one of the territory's most eligible bachelors? The day before the celebration, she made her decision. Digging through her trunk, she found a dress she hadn't worn since before the accident, a blue cotton with white trim that had once been her favorite. It would need modifications to accommodate sitting in her chair, but her fingers were nimble with a needle. She worked through the evening, altering the skirt, adding ties to make it suitable. When Jackson arrived the next day, she was waiting on the porch, dressed in her modified finery, hair arranged as best she could manage without help. The look on his face when he saw her made all her effort worthwhile. His eyes widened, and for a moment he simply stared. "You look beautiful," he said finally, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. Olivia felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, I decided it's time to stop hiding." Jackson's smile was warm. "I'm glad." The journey to town was smoother than Olivia had feared, thanks to Jackson's well-sprung wagon and his careful driving. As they approached the town square where bunting and flags decorated the buildings, Olivia felt her anxiety return. Perhaps this was a mistake, she murmured, twisting her hands in her lap. Jackson reached over, covering her nervous fingers with his hand. "You belong here as much as anyone," he said quietly, "and I'm proud to escort you." His touch and his words steadied her. When they arrived, Jackson lifted her from the wagon to her chair with a gentle strength that made her breath catch. His hands were firm yet careful, treating her with respect rather than as a fragile thing that might break. The celebration was in full swing, fiddles playing, children running with sparklers, tables laden with food brought by the community. As Jackson wheeled Olivia through the crowd, they drew curious glances, but to her surprise, not the pitying looks she dreaded. Many people greeted her warmly, expressing pleasure at seeing her in town again. Some mentioned how they'd heard of the improvements at her place, complimenting her garden or her chickens. She realized that in her self-imposed isolation, she had assumed the worst of her neighbors, when many had simply been unsure how to approach her. Throughout the evening, Jackson remained attentive without being overbearing. He brought her food, introduced her to newcomers to the territory, and even arranged for her chair to be positioned where she could see the dancing. As the music shifted to a slower tune, Jackson knelt beside her chair. "Would you honor me with this dance?" he asked. Olivia blinked in confusion. "How?" In answer, Jackson carefully took her hands, placing them on his shoulders as he began to sway in rhythm with the music, moving her chair slightly with the melody. It wasn't conventional dancing, but the intent, the connection, was the same. Looking up into his eyes as they moved together, Olivia felt something long dormant within her stir to life. The way he looked at her, not with pity, not with clinical interest in her condition, but with genuine admiration, made her feel truly seen for the first time since her accident. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," she said softly. Jackson's smile reached his eyes. "Thank you for coming, for trusting me." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Harriet Wilson, the banker's wife and the town's most notorious gossip. Jackson Reed, dancing with our Olivia. "Isn't this a lovely surprise?" she exclaimed, her voice carrying. "Such Christian charity, taking the poor dear under your wing." Olivia felt her face flame with humiliation. Of course. People weren't seeing her as a woman enjoying an evening out, they were seeing her as a charity case, an object of Jackson's pity. "Mrs. Wilson," Jackson replied, his voice cool, "there's no charity involved. Miss Montgomery is my guest this evening, because I enjoy her company above all others in this territory." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, well, I meant no offense, of course, it's just unusual to see." "That is," she floundered, then retreated with a forced smile. The damage was done, however. Olivia withdrew her hands from Jackson's shoulders. Perhaps we should leave, she said quietly. Jackson studied her face. Don't let her ruin your evening, he urged. What she thinks doesn't matter. It matters when it's what everyone thinks, Olivia replied, her voice tight, that I'm your good deed. Your Christian charity, as she put it. Is that what you think? Jackson asked, his expression troubled. Olivia hesitated. I don't know what to think anymore. Their ride back to her cabin was mostly silent, both lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Jackson helped her back into her chair with the same care as before. Olivia, he said as he prepared to leave, I want you to know nothing I've done has been out of pity. I admire your strength, your resilience, and I've come to care for you. Deeply. The confession hung in the air between them, fraught with possibility and fear. How can you, Olivia finally asked, gesturing to her chair, how can you care for this? For someone broken. Jackson knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. You're not broken, Olivia. You're the strongest person I know, and whatever challenges your body faces, they don't define who you are. He paused, his eyes intent on hers. If you'll allow me, I'd like to continue calling on you, not out of obligation or pity, but because being with you makes me happier than I've been in years. Olivia felt tears threaten. Part of her wanted desperately to believe him, to accept the possibility he offered, but the other part, the part that had learned to protect herself from disappointment, held back. I need time, she whispered. Jackson nodded, rising to his feet. I understand, and I'll wait however long you need. As she watched him ride away, Olivia wondered if she was making the greatest mistake of her life, pushing away someone who seemed to see beyond her disability. Or if she was protecting herself from inevitable heartbreak when he eventually realized the limitations of loving someone like her. The weeks that followed were filled with confusion for Olivia. True to his word, Jackson continued to visit, though there was a new carefulness in his manner. He helped with small repairs around her property, brought books they discussed over supper, and generally became a fixture in her once solitary life. Yet neither mentioned his declaration or her hesitant response. The unspoken feelings between them grew like her garden, tended carefully, producing something new and fragile, but not yet harvested. In late July, Olivia's existence was further disrupted by an unexpected visitor. She was in her garden harvesting beans when a smart buggy pulled up to her cabin. The man who emerged was expensively dressed, with a city lawyer's tailored suit and polished boots that had clearly never seen ranch work. Miss Montgomery, he called, approaching her garden plot. I'm Theodore Blackwell, representing Western Territories Railroad. Olivia wheeled herself to the edge of the garden. What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwell? The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. It's what I can do for you, Miss Montgomery. I'm authorized to offer you a substantial sum for your property. The railroad is planning a spur line through this valley, and your land sits at a critical juncture. Olivia frowned. My land isn't for sale. Blackwell's smile tightened. Perhaps you should hear the offer before deciding. $5,000, Miss Montgomery, a generous amount for a property of this size, particularly in your circumstances. His eyes flicked meaningfully to her chair. The amount was indeed substantial, enough to set herself up comfortably elsewhere, perhaps even back east where she had relatives, distant though they were. Yet the thought of leaving, of abandoning her father's dream and the home she had fought so hard to maintain, was unthinkable. As I said, Mr. Blackwell, the land isn't for sale, at any price. The lawyer's facade of pleasantness slipped. Miss Montgomery, be reasonable. What can you possibly hope to accomplish here alone? The railroad is coming whether you sell willingly or not. Eminent domain will force your hand eventually. Olivia straightened in her chair. Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwell? Merely a statement of fact. The territory needs progress, and progress requires rail lines. He placed his card on her garden wall. Think about it. The offer stands for 2 weeks. After that, legal proceedings begin, and the compensation will be considerably less. After he left, Olivia sat in her garden, trembling with anger and fear. If what the lawyer said was true, she could lose everything, not just the land, but the independence she had clawed back for herself, the life she was rebuilding. She needed advice, and there was only one person she trusted to provide it. Jackson arrived within hours of receiving her urgent message. His face was grim as Olivia explained the railroad's offer and threat. "They're bluffing about eminent domain," he said after she finished. "The territorial legislature hasn't granted those powers for branch lines, only main routes, but they're hoping you don't know that." Relief flooded Olivia. "So I can simply refuse to sell?" Jackson hesitated. "You can, but they have other ways of getting what they want. They could dam the creek upstream, cutting off your water. Or they could buy surrounding parcels and isolate your property." He looked troubled. "These railroad men play rough, Olivia." "What would you do?" she asked quietly. Jackson was silent for a long moment. "Truthfully, I'd fight. But I have resources you don't, lawyers, political connections, men who work for me." He met her eyes. "Which is why I have a proposition for you." Olivia tensed. "What sort of proposition?" "A business arrangement. I'll buy your land for more than the railroad offered, then lease it back to you for a nominal sum. You keep your home, I get another piece of property to add to the Diamond R, and together we present a united front against the railroad." The offer was practical, even generous. Yet something in it stung Olivia deeply. A business arrangement, of course. Not a declaration of continued affection, not an offer of partnership in the deeper sense she had begun to hope for, despite her fears. "I see," she said, struggling to keep her voice even. "A practical solution." Jackson seemed to sense her disappointment but misinterpreted its cause. "You wouldn't be beholden to me, Olivia. The lease would be legally binding, protecting your right to remain here as long as you wish, and the purchase price would give you a financial cushion for the future." Olivia nodded stiffly. "It's a generous offer. I'll consider it." "Please do," Jackson said earnestly. "I don't want to see you forced off your land by railroad thugs." After he left, Olivia sat long into the evening, watching darkness settle over her small homestead. Jackson's offer made perfect sense. It would solve her immediate problem while preserving her independence. Yet it felt like an ending rather than a beginning, the final abandonment of any dream that there might be something more between them than friendship and practical considerations. "The frontier is no place for broken things," she whispered to herself. "I was a fool to forget that, even for a moment." The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Frank Wilson, Jackson's foreman, arrived with an unexpected message. "Mr. Reed asked me to tell you he's been called away on urgent business in Helena," the man said awkwardly. "Said to tell you he's sorry he couldn't come himself, but it couldn't wait." "Something about the railroad." Olivia nodded, hiding her disappointment. "Thank you for delivering the message, Mr. Wilson." The foreman hesitated. "He also asked me to check if you need anything while he's gone. Expected to be away a week or more." "I'm quite self-sufficient, Mr. Wilson, but thank you." After the foreman left, Olivia tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. Jackson had gone to Helena without a proper goodbye, leaving only a second-hand message. Perhaps he had finally realized the futility of their friendship, the impracticality of caring for someone with her limitations. Or perhaps he had simply grown tired of her hesitation, her inability to trust his declarations. Either way, she told herself firmly, it was for the best. She would accept his business proposition when he returned, a clean, practical arrangement with clear boundaries. No more confusion, no more painful hope. 3 days later, Olivia woke to the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. She quickly dressed and wheeled herself onto the porch, her father's rifle across her lap. 4 men dismounted in her yard. She recognized Theodore Blackwell, the railroad lawyer. The others were rough-looking men with the hard eyes of hired muscle. "Miss Montgomery," Blackwell called, approaching the porch, "I hope you've reconsidered our generous offer." "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Blackwell. The land isn't for sale." The lawyer sighed theatrically. "That's unfortunate, particularly since we've had reports that this property has been abandoned. No man in residence, just a crippled woman who clearly can't maintain it properly." Olivia's grip tightened on her rifle. "This property is not abandoned, it's my home." "Is it?" Blackwell gestured to his men, who began spreading out. "Looks to me like that barn's about to collapse, and that fencing is in disrepair." Abandoned properties can be claimed for public use much more easily than occupied ones. One of the men approached her chicken coop with deliberate steps. "Stop right there," Olivia called, raising her rifle. You're trespassing. The man looked to Blackwell, who nodded slightly. With a vicious grin, the man kicked at the chicken coop, sending the birds into a panicked flutter. Olivia fired a warning shot into the air. The next one won't miss, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The men froze, but Blackwell merely looked amused. Really, Miss Montgomery, one woman against 4 men. Even if you shoot one of us, what then? He nodded to his men, who began to advance again. Restrain her, don't hurt her, just keep her from interfering while we inspect the property for evidence of abandonment. Olivia swung her rifle toward Blackwell himself, but before she could fire, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. 3 riders charged in, rifles drawn. At their head was Frank Wilson, Jackson's foreman. That's far enough, Wilson called, his rifle trained on Blackwell. Miss Montgomery asked you to leave. I suggest you do so. Blackwell's face flushed with anger. This is none of your concern, Wilson. Reed sent you to spy on us, did he? Mr. Reed asked me to keep an eye on Miss Montgomery's property while he was away, Wilson replied calmly. Good thing he did. Now mount up and ride out, or this gets ugly real fast. For a tense moment, Olivia thought Blackwell might order his men to fight, but finally, the lawyer signaled a retreat. This isn't over, he said to Olivia as he mounted his horse. Reed won't always be around to protect you. After they left, Olivia sagged in her chair, the rifle heavy in her trembling hands. Are you all right, Miss Montgomery? Wilson asked, dismounting. She nodded, trying to compose herself. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, your timing was impeccable. The foreman looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, just following Mr. Reed's orders. He was worried something like this might happen with him away. He hesitated. If you don't mind, miss, I'll have one of my men stay here until Mr. Reed returns. Just to be safe. Olivia wanted to refuse, to insist she could protect herself, but the morning's events had shaken her badly. She wasn't safe alone, not with men like Blackwell determined to drive her off her land. I would appreciate that, she admitted. Wilson nodded. Mr. Reed left something else for you too, a letter, said to give it to you if there was any trouble. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. After Wilson and his men departed, leaving one young ranch hand named Tommy to stand guard, Olivia retreated to her cabin and opened Jackson's letter with trembling fingers. Olivia, if you're reading this, it means the railroad men have made their move sooner than I expected. I've gone to Helena to speak with the territorial governor, an old friend of my father's, about the railroad's tactics. I believe I can secure an injunction against their harassment, but it will take time. Please trust Frank and his men. They'll protect your property until I return, and please consider my offer. Not because I doubt your ability to stand alone, but because together we would be stronger than either of us separately. There is more I want to say, things I find difficult to express in writing. But know this, my concern for your welfare goes far beyond any business arrangement or obligation. You have become precious to me in ways I never anticipated. I will return as soon as possible. Yours, Jackson. Olivia read the letter 3 times, her heart beating faster with each reading. Yours, he had signed it, and you have become precious to me, not the words of someone making a mere business proposition. For the first time, Olivia allowed herself to fully consider the possibility that Jackson Reed truly cared for her, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. But even if his feelings were genuine, could she truly accept them? Could she bear to be loved by a man who would always have to accommodate her limitations, who would never have a wife who could walk beside him, dance with him properly, bear his children without risk? The questions haunted her as days passed with no word from Jackson. Tommy, the young ranch hand, proved to be good company, respectful but friendly, happy to help with chores around the property. He even rigged a clever pulley system that allowed Olivia to hang laundry from her chair, a task that had always been difficult for her. A week after Blackwell's visit, disaster struck. Olivia woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment she thought someone had started cooking breakfast, then she realized the acrid scent was too strong, too close. Fire, Tommy's voice shouted from outside. Miss Montgomery, get out. Olivia pulled herself into her chair as quickly as she could, grabbing her father's rifle and the small box of keepsakes she kept by her bed. Smoke was already filling the cabin, stinging her eyes and burning her lungs. She wheeled toward the door, but flames were already licking at the wooden walls near the entrance. The fire had clearly been set deliberately, starting at the porch. "Tommy," she called, coughing, "the door's blocked." The window, came his muffled reply. "Break the window." Olivia turned toward the small window beside her bed. Using the rifle butt, she smashed the glass, clearing the frame as best she could. But the opening was small, and she knew her chair wouldn't fit through. Outside, she could hear Tommy struggling with something. Then his face appeared at the window. "Can you pull yourself out?" he asked, reaching in. "I'll help you." Olivia hesitated only briefly before setting aside her pride. Using her upper body strength, considerable after years of maneuvering her chair, she grasped Tommy's hands and pulled herself toward the window. The young man helped her maneuver through the opening, careful of the broken glass. Once outside, he lifted her away from the burning cabin, settling her on the ground at a safe distance. "My chair," Olivia gasped. "It's still inside." Tommy looked at the cabin, now fully engulfed in flames. "Too dangerous, miss, that roof's about to cave." As if his words had summoned it, there was a terrible cracking sound as the cabin's roof collapsed inward, sending sparks and burning debris shooting into the pre-dawn sky. Olivia watched her home burn with a strange detachment. The cabin where she had grown up, where her father had died, where she had learned to live with her disability, all of it gone in minutes. "The barn," she said suddenly. "Tommy, check the barn." The young man raced to the small barn where Olivia kept her garden tools and the few supplies she'd accumulated. It too had been set ablaze, though the fire hadn't yet taken full hold. "Bucket chain," Tommy shouted. "We might save this one." Together they fought the barn fire, Tommy running with buckets from the well, Olivia passing them forward from where she sat on the ground. By sunrise they had managed to extinguish it, though not before significant damage was done to one wall and the roof. Exhausted and smoke-stained, Olivia looked at the smoldering ruins of her cabin. Everything she owned was gone: her clothes, her father's few possessions she had treasured, her chair that gave her independence. Even the chickens had either been killed or scattered by the fire and commotion. "Who did this?" Tommy asked, his young face hardened with anger. "The railroad men." "Most likely," Olivia replied, her voice hollow. "Mr. Blackwell did say it wasn't over." Tommy helped her into the damaged barn, fashioning a makeshift seat from hay bales and a horse blanket that had survived the fire. "I'll ride for the Diamond R," he said. "Get help. Will you be all right alone for a bit?" Olivia nodded numbly. What choice did she have? She couldn't walk, couldn't run if danger returned. She was as helpless as she had been in those first terrible days after her accident. After Tommy galloped off, Olivia sat in the barn doorway, looking at the ruins of her life. She had lost everything: her home, her independence, even the small garden she had tended so carefully. The railroad men had won. Without a habitable dwelling, without even her wheeled chair, she could not possibly maintain her claim to the land. For the first time since her father's death, Olivia allowed herself to weep openly, harsh sobs that tore at her throat, already raw from smoke. She wept for her father's dream, now literally in ashes. For her own stubborn pride that had perhaps cost her a chance at happiness with Jackson. For the cruel reminder of how vulnerable she truly was in this unforgiving territory. She was still weeping when hoofbeats approached hours later, not Tommy returning, but a single rider pushing his horse hard. Through tear-blurred eyes, she recognized Jackson Reed, his face set in lines of grim determination as he surveyed the destruction. He dismounted in a fluid motion and strode to where she sat, kneeling before her. "Olivia," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. Jackson reached out tentatively, then seemed to make a decision. He gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest as she wept. His heartbeat was strong and steady under her cheek, his arms secure around her trembling body. "I'm here now," he murmured into her hair. "I'm here." When her tears finally subsided, Jackson gently set her back on her makeshift seat, though he kept one hand on hers, as if afraid to break contact. "Tommy found me on the road," he explained. "I was already heading back. The governor granted the injunction against the railroad, but clearly Blackwell decided to act before legal papers could be served." His face darkened with anger. "They'll pay for this, Olivia, I swear it." "It doesn't matter now," Olivia said dully. "They've won, my home is gone, my chair is gone, I have nothing left." Jackson's hand tightened on hers. "You have me," he said simply. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond their simplicity. "Jackson," Olivia began, then faltered. "I can't. I won't be your charity case, your burden to bear out of kindness or obligation." "Is that what you think?" Jackson asked, his voice strained. "That I see you as a burden?" He moved to sit beside her on the hay bale, still holding her hand. "Olivia, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've reminded me that there's more to living than building fences and counting cattle. Your courage, your determination, your mind, they've woken something in me I thought was dead." Olivia looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or obligation. She found only sincerity and something deeper, a vulnerability she had never seen in his usually controlled expression. "I love you," he said quietly, "not despite your condition, not out of pity or duty. I love your strength, your stubborn pride, your quick mind. I love the way you refuse to surrender, even when the odds are impossible." He paused, his blue eyes intent on hers. "And I hope that you might feel something for me too. Something beyond gratitude or friendship." Olivia's heart pounded. The declaration she had both longed for and feared had finally come at the moment when she was most vulnerable, most broken. "I do," she whispered. "But Jackson, you must understand, I will never walk again, never dance with you properly, never ride beside you without assistance. I will always need help with certain things. Is that truly the life you want? A wife who is half a woman?" Anger flashed across Jackson's face. "Half a woman," he repeated, his voice tight. "Is that how you see yourself?" He took her face gently between his hands. "Olivia Montgomery, you are more woman than any I've ever known. Your courage, your determination, they humble me. And yes, there are things you need assistance with, just as there are things I need help with." "It's hardly the same," Olivia protested. "Isn't it?" Jackson countered. "Can I cook a meal worth eating? No. Can I sew a straight seam? Definitely not. Can I discuss literature or play the piano or make a home feel warm and welcoming? These are all things at which I fail miserably." His expression softened. "We all have limitations, Olivia. Yours are simply more visible than most." His words penetrated the armor Olivia had built around her heart, the certainty that no man could truly want her as she was, that any offer of love must be tainted with pity or obligation. "You truly don't mind?" she asked, her voice small. In answer, Jackson leaned forward and kissed her gently. His lips were warm and sure against hers, the contact sending a jolt of awareness through her body. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "The only thing I mind," he said huskily, "is the thought of living without you." In that moment, something long frozen within Olivia began to thaw. The belief that had shaped her existence since the accident, that she was broken, unlovable, a burden, began to crumble in the face of Jackson's unwavering gaze. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for some time, but I was too afraid to admit it, too afraid to believe that someone like you could truly want someone like me." Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Then believe it now," he said, drawing her into his arms again, "because I'm not going anywhere, not now, not ever." As they sat together amid the ruins of Olivia's homestead, plans began to form. Jackson would take her to the Diamond R, where she would recover from the trauma of the fire. They would rebuild on her land, not just a cabin, but a proper house that would accommodate her needs. And when that was done, they would marry, combining their properties and their lives. The railroad, Jackson promised, would face both legal consequences for their actions and the formidable opposition of the largest landowner in the territory. They would not win this battle. As Tommy returned with more men from the Diamond R, bringing a wagon suitable for transporting Olivia, she felt a strange sense of peace despite all she had lost. The fire had destroyed her possessions, but in doing so, it had also burned away the last of her resistance to happiness. "Ready to go home?" Jackson asked as he carefully lifted her into the wagon. Olivia looked at him, at the love shining in his eyes, and realized that home was no longer a place, it was a person. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." The Diamond R ranch house was everything Olivia had imagined it to be, spacious, comfortable, and meticulously maintained. Mrs. Hatcher, the housekeeper who had helped with Olivia's garden, welcomed her with genuine warmth, quickly showing her to a large, airy bedroom on the first floor. Mr. Reed had us move things around so you wouldn't have to worry about stairs, the older woman explained, gesturing to the room that had clearly once been a study or library. And he's already ordered you a new wheeled chair from Chicago, should be here within the month. Olivia was overwhelmed by Jackson's thoughtfulness. In the meantime, he had procured a temporary chair from the doctor in town, not as well suited to her as her custom one had been, but functional enough to restore some of her independence. The first weeks at the Diamond R were a period of adjustment for them both. Jackson, accustomed to living alone, had to learn to share his space and his decisions. Olivia, used to complete independence despite her disability, had to learn to accept help without seeing it as charity. Their courtship continued in this new setting, with quiet evenings spent reading by the fire, long conversations over meals, and careful planning for their future. Jackson had filed charges against Blackwell and the railroad company, using his considerable influence to ensure the territorial authorities took the matter seriously. A month after the fire, they visited Olivia's land together. Construction had begun on a new house, larger than her original cabin, designed with wide doorways and ramps instead of steps. The barn had been repaired, and new chickens clucked in a rebuilt coop. "It's more than I ever dreamed," Olivia said, surveying the activity from her new chair, which had arrived from Chicago the week before. Jackson squeezed her shoulder gently. "You deserve it all and more." As summer turned to fall, their wedding plans progressed. They would marry at Christmas, when the new house would be completed. Until then, Olivia would remain at the Diamond R, learning the operations of the larger ranch and beginning to combine their business affairs. The railroad case moved through territorial court, with evidence mounting against Blackwell and his employers. The governor himself took an interest, concerned about corporate strong-arm tactics against vulnerable settlers. In October, as the aspens turned golden on the mountainsides, news came that Blackwell had fled the territory ahead of an arrest warrant. The railroad company, distancing itself from his actions, withdrew its interest in the disputed land and offered a substantial settlement to avoid further legal proceedings. "It's over," Jackson told Olivia as they sat on the porch of the Diamond R, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. "The railroad's backing down completely. Your land is secure." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "Our land," she corrected gently. "Everything we have belongs to both of us now." Jackson smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "I like the sound of that." November brought an unexpected visitor to the Diamond R. Dr. Williams, returning from medical training in the East, stopped by with news he thought might interest Olivia. "There are new treatments being developed," he explained as they sat in Jackson's study. "Surgeries and therapies that have shown some success with cases like yours. No guarantees, of course, but there have been instances where patients regained partial mobility." Olivia listened with cautious interest. "What would these treatments involve?" "The most promising would require travel to Boston. There's a surgeon there specializing in spinal injuries. It would be a difficult journey and the procedure itself carries risks, but the potential benefit," he left the sentence hanging. Jackson, watching Olivia's face, said carefully, "It's your decision, of course, but if you wanted to try, I'd take you to Boston myself. Stay as long as needed." Olivia was silent for a long moment, considering. 2 years ago she would have grasped at any chance, however slim, to regain the use of her legs, but now, "I don't think so," she said finally. "Not now, at least." She looked at Jackson, then back to the doctor. "I've learned to live with my condition. I've built a life I'm proud of, a future I look forward to. Why risk all that for an uncertain outcome?" The doctor nodded, understanding. "The option remains open, should you ever change your mind. And there are less invasive therapies we could try here, if you're interested." "I might be," Olivia allowed, "but not because I feel incomplete as I am, only because more mobility would be practically useful." After the doctor left, Jackson knelt beside Olivia's chair. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I would spare no expense, take any amount of time needed if there's a chance you could walk again." Olivia touched his face gently. "I know you would, and I love you for it. But I've made peace with who I am now. My worth isn't measured by whether I can walk or not." Jackson covered her hand with his own. "No, it isn't. Your worth is in your heart, your mind, your spirit." He leaned forward to kiss her softly. "But if you ever change your mind." You'll be the first to know, Olivia promised. For now, though, I'd rather focus on our wedding and our future together. December brought snow to the valley, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse that glittered in the winter sun. Construction on the new house at Olivia's property, now officially merged with the Diamond R into a single, vast ranch, was completed just in time for Christmas. The house was everything they had planned together, spacious yet comfortable, with every consideration for Olivia's mobility needs without being institutional. Wide hallways, accessible fixtures, and cleverly designed furniture allowed her nearly complete independence within its walls. Their wedding was held on Christmas Eve in the town's small church, decorated with evergreens and candlelight for the holiday. Olivia wore a gown of ivory silk, seated in her chair which had been decorated with white ribbons and winter berries. Jackson, handsome in a new suit, watched with undisguised love as her attendants wheeled her down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through all of life's challenges, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. These were not empty words for either of them. They had already proven their commitment through fire and hardship. The reception was held at their new home, with neighbors and friends from throughout the valley in attendance. Mrs. Wilson, the banker's wife who had once dismissed Olivia as a charity case, was notably subdued as she offered her congratulations to the radiant bride and her devoted groom. As the celebration continued around them, Jackson knelt beside Olivia's chair, taking her hands in his. "Happy?" he asked softly. Olivia's smile was answer enough, but she added, "Happier than I ever thought possible." She glanced around at their home, filled with music and laughter. "If someone had told me a year ago that this would be my life, I would never have believed them." Jackson raised her hand to his lips. "This is just the beginning," he promised. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." Later that night, after their guests had departed, they sat together before the fire in their new home. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in peaceful white. Inside, warmth and love created a sanctuary against the winter cold. "I have something for you," Jackson said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He handed Olivia a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found miniature portraits of her father and mother, carefully painted from old photographs she had lost in the fire. "How did you?" she began, tears filling her eyes. "I had copies of the photographs in town," Jackson explained. "I sent them to an artist in Helena months ago, hoping they'd be ready in time for our wedding." Olivia clutched the locket to her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered, "the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Jackson helped her fasten the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "I wanted you to have them with you always," he said. "To know that they would be proud of the woman you've become." Olivia looked up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "I love you, Jackson Reed." "And I love you, Olivia Reed," he replied, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. He lifted her easily from her chair to settle her on his lap before the fire, his arms strong and sure around her. "More than I have words to express." As they sat together in the warm glow of the hearth, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had once believed herself broken beyond repair, destined for loneliness in a frontier that had no place for damaged things. She had clung to that false belief like a shield, protecting herself from the risk of further pain. But Jackson had seen beyond her disability, beyond the walls she had built around her heart. He had persisted, patient and unwavering, until she could recognize the truth, that her worth was not measured by what she had lost, but by the strength she had found in surviving. And in loving him, in allowing herself to be loved completely, she had discovered a freedom more profound than any physical mobility could provide. The freedom to be fully herself, limitations and all, and to be cherished not despite those limitations, but as a whole person worthy of love. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softening the harsh edges of the frontier landscape. Inside, in the home they had built together, Olivia and Jackson began their life as husband and wife, partners in every sense, their separate strengths combining to create something stronger than either could have built alone. The frontier might indeed be no place for broken things, but Olivia Montgomery Reed was not broken. She was exactly as she was meant to be, loved, loving, and finally, completely whole. As spring returned to the Montana Territory in 1870, the merged Diamond R and Circle M ranches flourished under the joint stewardship of Jackson and Olivia Reed. Their marriage had brought not only personal happiness but business prosperity, with Jackson's cattle operation complemented by Olivia's talent for organization and accounts. From her wheeled chair, Olivia managed the ranch's books with meticulous precision, identifying inefficiencies and opportunities that had escaped notice before. Under her guidance, they expanded into breeding specialty stock, a venture that promised higher returns than the traditional approach of raising cattle solely for meat. Jackson, for his part, found that sharing his life and work with Olivia brought a richness he had never expected. His once empty house had become a true home, filled with conversation, laughter, and the warmth of shared purpose. The loneliness that had shadowed him even amid his success had vanished, replaced by a deep contentment that infused everything he did. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings began with breakfast together, discussing the day's tasks and longer-term plans. Jackson would then ride out to oversee the ranch operations while Olivia managed correspondence, accounts, and household matters. Evenings were reserved for each other, reading aloud from new books ordered from back east, playing chess, at which Olivia regularly trounced him, or simply talking until the fire burned low. In June, their happiness expanded further with news that brought both joy and trepidation. Dr. Williams, making one of his regular visits to check on Olivia's health, confirmed what she had begun to suspect. "You're approximately 3 months along," he said after his examination. "The baby appears healthy, though given your condition, this pregnancy will require careful monitoring." Olivia gripped Jackson's hand tightly as the doctor continued, explaining the particular challenges her disability might present during pregnancy and childbirth. The risks were significant but manageable with proper care. "I would recommend you travel to Helena for the delivery," Dr. Williams concluded. "The hospital there is better equipped for potential complications." After the doctor left, Olivia looked up at Jackson, her eyes reflecting both happiness and fear. "A baby," she whispered, "our baby." Jackson knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Are you all right with this, with the risks?" Olivia nodded slowly. "I want this child, Jackson, more than I can say. But I'm frightened too." "We'll take every precaution," he promised, "and I'll be with you every step of the way." As her pregnancy progressed, Olivia faced both the universal discomforts experienced by all expectant mothers and challenges unique to her situation. Her balance, already compromised by her paralysis, became even more precarious as her center of gravity shifted. Simple transfers from chair to bed or bath became increasingly difficult. Jackson adapted with her, learning to assist in ways that preserved her dignity while ensuring her safety. He commissioned a specially designed chair with adjustable features to accommodate her changing body, and had their bedroom rearranged for maximum accessibility. The ranch hands, many of whom had initially been uncertain how to interact with the boss's crippled wife, had long since come to respect Olivia for her sharp mind and quiet strength. Now they showed their support in practical ways, building ramps where steps had previously sufficed, ensuring paths were kept clear and smooth for her chair, bringing matters to the house for her input rather than requiring her to navigate to the outbuildings. In early December, as Olivia entered her 8th month, they relocated temporarily to Helena as the doctor had recommended. Jackson rented a comfortable house near the hospital and arranged for Mrs. Hatcher to accompany them to help with household matters. The separation from the ranch was difficult for them both, especially Jackson. He had never been away from his land for so long, and though Frank Wilson was more than capable of managing in his absence, Jackson felt the pull of responsibility. "Go home for a few days," Olivia urged as Christmas approached, seeing his restlessness. "Check on things, reassure yourself all is well. Mrs. Hatcher will look after me." Jackson shook his head firmly. "My place is with you." Olivia took his hand, placing it on her rounded abdomen where their child kicked vigorously. "We're not going anywhere just yet," she said with a smile. "And you'll be a better companion if you're not fretting about the ranch." Finally convinced, Jackson made a brief 3-day journey back to the ranch, returning with renewed energy and Christmas gifts from the hands for both Olivia and the expected baby. The new year of 1871 was just 2 days old when Olivia's labor began. Despite the doctor's careful planning, the process proved even more complicated than anticipated. Her inability to feel contractions below her waist made it difficult to time her pushing efforts, and her lack of muscle control in her lower body complicated the baby's descent. For 20 long hours, Jackson remained by her side, supporting her through each difficult phase. When the doctor's expression grew concerned and whispered consultations with the nurse became more frequent, Jackson's fear threatened to overwhelm him. "I can't lose you," he murmured against Olivia's damp hair as she rested between efforts. "Either of you." Olivia, exhausted beyond measure but still determined, squeezed his hand. "You won't," she promised, though the words cost her precious energy. Finally, as dawn broke on January 4th, their daughter entered the world with a strong, indignant cry that brought tears of relief to Jackson's eyes. The doctor's tension visibly eased as he pronounced both mother and child healthy, despite the difficult delivery. "She's perfect," Jackson whispered, placing their swaddled daughter in Olivia's eager arms. "Just like her mother." Olivia gazed down at the tiny face with its shock of dark hair and delicate features. "Hello, Elizabeth," she said softly, using the name they had chosen to honor Jackson's mother. "We've been waiting for you." The journey back to the ranch when Elizabeth was 6 weeks old was undertaken with extreme care. Jackson had commissioned a special wagon with the best springs available, outfitted with a mattress and padding to minimize jostling for Olivia and the baby. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently to rest and tend to Elizabeth's needs. Their return was celebrated by the entire ranch community. The Hands had prepared a surprise, a nursery adjacent to the master bedroom, painted and furnished with items they had crafted themselves. A rocking chair specially designed for Olivia's use, a crib with sides that could be lowered for easier access from her wheeled chair. Clever shelving placed at heights she could reach without straining. "We figured the little miss should have a proper welcome," Frank Wilson explained gruffly, embarrassed by Olivia's tears of gratitude. As winter released its grip on the land and spring once again brought renewal, Jackson and Olivia settled into the rhythms of parenthood. Elizabeth proved to be a good-natured baby, with her father's blue eyes and a determined spirit that both recognized as Olivia's influence. Motherhood presented Olivia with new challenges but also profound joys. She had worried that her disability might prevent her from caring for her child properly, but with creativity and Jackson's partnership, she found ways to manage each task. A sling allowed her to carry Elizabeth securely while moving in her chair. Bathing arrangements were modified for safety and accessibility. As Elizabeth grew and began to crawl, the house was carefully child-proofed in ways that maintained Olivia's independence. Jackson, watching his wife and daughter together, felt a depth of happiness he had never imagined possible. Seeing Olivia sing softly to Elizabeth as she rocked her to sleep, or reading to her from the same book she shared with him in the evenings, he understood that the empire he had built meant nothing compared to the family that now inhabited it. On a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in Olivia's arms, Jackson voiced a thought that had been forming for some time. "I'd like to establish a foundation," he said, "to help others with injuries like yours, people who need specially adapted equipment, medical care, opportunities to work and live independently." Olivia looked at him with surprise. "What brought this on?" Jackson reached over to stroke Elizabeth's dark hair gently. "Watching you these past 2 years. Seeing how a few adaptations, the right support, can make all the difference between dependency and dignity." He met her eyes. "Before you, I saw disability as a tragedy, an ending. You've shown me it's simply a different path, with its own challenges but also its own unique perspectives and strengths." Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes. "Jackson Reed, when did you become such a philosopher?" He smiled, leaning over to kiss her softly. "When I fell in love with the most remarkable woman in Montana Territory." Olivia shifted Elizabeth to one arm so she could touch his face. "A foundation is a wonderful idea. And I'd like to be involved in planning it, if you're willing." "I was counting on it," Jackson replied. "Your experience makes you the perfect person to ensure it truly meets people's needs." As they continued to discuss the possibilities, scholarships for promising students with disabilities, funding for adaptive equipment, support for families, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years ago, she had been alone, starving, believing herself broken beyond repair and destined for a bitter end. The accident that had taken her legs had seemed to take her future as well, leaving her with nothing but grim endurance and the certainty that happiness was beyond her reach. Now she sat on the porch of a beautiful home, her husband beside her, their child in her arms, and plans forming for a foundation that might help others find the support and dignity she had been fortunate enough to discover. The wheel of her life had turned in ways she could never have imagined. "Thank you," she said softly to Jackson. He looked at her questioningly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. For loving me completely, limitations and all." Jackson took her free hand, raising it to his lips. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done," he said simply. "And the most rewarding." As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Olivia Montgomery Reed looked at her husband, her child, and the life they had built together. She had once believed the frontier was no place for broken things. Now she understood that nothing and no one was ever truly broken, only waiting for the right hands to reveal the beauty in their unique form. Her hand remained in Jackson's as darkness settled over their land, not the darkness of isolation and despair that had once defined her existence, but a gentle night full of stars, promising dawn and endless possibilities. A darkness made beautiful by the light they had kindled together, the enduring light of love that had carried her from starvation to abundance, from solitude to family, from despair to hope. And in that light, Olivia found the completion of her journey, not in the healing of her body, which remained as it was, but in the healing of her heart, in the knowledge that she was loved not despite her limitations, but as a complete and worthy woman, capable of giving and receiving love in its fullest measure. The frontier, she had learned, was a place for all who had the courage to claim it. And in Jackson's arms, with their daughter between them and their future stretching bright before them, Olivia had found not just survival, but a life more rich and full than she had ever dared to dream.